Um, Thanks, Rahul. So I think my talk flows very nicely with the kind of points which Rahul raised, specifically basically thinking like maybe something. Yeah, specifically basically thinking about if you're doing 85% in action recognition, there's definitely something wrong. I mean, because otherwise you would think that we are so close to solving the problem of action, and I am sure because all of you work here on action, you know that we are nowhere close. I mean, we are as a group are nowhere close to any of this problem. We are probably farther than object recognition people are from object recognition if we have to do some of things over it as well. So I'm going to try to look into a little bit ahead the classification or detection and see what might be another way to look at the problem of understanding videos. As Rahul said that this is a very small group, so feel free to disturb me in between if you have questions or if I make a claim which you might not like. And I'm happy to not go through all my slides if required. Okay, so since I'm looking ahead, I need to ask this question, and this is my favorite question I ask for every talk before I go forward. That our goal is to do visual understanding of the videos. But what does it mean to understand? The kind of actions, the challenge what we are looking at is more like classification. So given a video, it might be trimmed or untrimmed, we are trying to get a single word out for that video. For example, for this video, this would be clean and jerk. This is a clean and jerk action. And not going into the approaches, since all of you know about those approaches. The most common approach is take a video, extract some features out of it. This could be bag of words, CNN-based features nowadays are more common. And then you train your favorite classifier, like SVM, by having lots of positive and negative examples, and then you use this to do classification. Now, the reason why all of us are doing this, why all the challenges are, is that first, it's easy to annotate. I mean, there's a reason why we are all going towards it, and we are kind of, this is like the dark side here, that's why we are moving towards it. It's easy to annotate, you can label 100,000 videos easily, it's just 100,000 labels, nothing else. And the second part is, the approaches are very simple. Right? You just say, you just have to learn your favorite classifier, and it will give out your classification score. And you do get scores which might or might not be meaningful, for example, 85%. But if you think of what actually we understood for the video, this is what we got out of it. The single label for the whole video. And if I ask you any detailed question about the video, I'm sure none of us will be able to answer just by looking at this label that were there 2 people in the video, what kind of action did it go through, and so on. So the next step would be, okay, you say that this is not right. Let's go to another way of understanding videos, and that would be more like TrekWit style understanding. There is a program in IARPA, something like that, where you try to understand videos in terms of primitives, like at different constituents. And you say, okay, I can understand this video by saying that there's bending. After bending, you pick up the weights, and then you lift the weight. You can say, okay, there are objects like weights and people in the video, and you can even say that the scene is a gym scene. And you hope that this is now the true understanding. And if we can solve this problem, we are probably here. And a lot of people have tried it, and just to show my example, because so this is something that I tried in 2009, trying to recognize all the primitive actions and trying to somehow combine these primitive actions into one long story. So for example, in this case, the baseball video, the algorithm says that the pitcher is pitching the ball, the batter hits it, the fielder is catching the ball, and all these assignments are shown in color. Then the ball is thrown towards the base, and the fielder at the base catches the ball. Because I tried to learn this model from linguistic descriptions which were hand labeled, you can obtain some kind of linguistic output for the video, like pitcher pitches the ball before batter hits, batter hit and then simultaneously run. This is kind of very baby talk type of thing which Kamal has said in the book. So the good thing about this is definitely richer than single. So that I think all of us agree. And furthermore, because we are modeling everything in terms of constituent bits and pieces, we can include constraints. Like you can say some actions can only happen with some kind of objects. Drinking can only happen with a cup or bottle. So this kind of helps you to improve the recognition performance, and it probably leads to better results. But there are still some limitations of this approach and some limitations of the whole idea. So the first thing is semantic constraints are not discriminative enough. So until last year, I mean, definitely we have made a lot of progress last year with deep networks coming into being, but before that we were having a lot of problem in having even Pascal challenge more than 30-40%. But even now, even with deep networks, the ImageNet challenge detection task, the recognition, the best performance was 40%. I would say if you are looking at a truly unbiased data, we will be around same type place in action recognition or even maybe a little less or something like that. And so now you have this algorithm which takes into input like 30 or 40% results from action and object recognition, and now you have to reason on top of it. The only problem is if whatever goes into your reasoning algorithm is garbage, because 30-40%, I'm not sure how many are good and how many are bad labels. It will tend to turn out garbage unless you are kind of doing very simple videos. The second thing is evaluation criteria, no more clear at all. Now the video has so many people or so many small things. Should I be labeling every small thing, or do I care about some labels more than the others? So how do I evaluate it is the second issue for this approach. But for me, the biggest problem is that the interpretation is still going to be very local. Even if you try to combine it, I'm not sure if I can call it a true understanding of the video. So the question is, what will be the true understanding of the video? And so what my feeling is that we humans are not just trying to understand bits and pieces. We are trying to stitch all this together and generate a much deeper understanding of the world. For example, we can not only say what's happening right now in the image, but we can even predict what's going to happen next. And this is the example I'm going to show from David Fosdyke's slides, and I really like this example. And this kind of tells you why we need to think of the prediction problem rather than just the understanding part of it. So here is a video, I'm sure a lot of you might have seen it, of a subway station. And you can see that if the video is just stopped here, we can answer some questions. We know basically what's going to happen next. That something bad is going to happen in this case. All of us can recognize that. We can even hallucinate what it's going to look like when this cart is going to fall and so on. But if I ask you how many people were there, or what was the color of the clothes these people were wearing, you will not be able to answer it. And the reason is we are not even paying attention to those kind of facts. For humans or for understanding, everything doesn't matter. What matters are the few bits and pieces, some important bits and pieces, which we use to develop understanding. Just to make sure that, just to show you what was the future, and every one of us are on the same page. So the car did fall, and there was a subway that went on top of it, but the baby was not hurt because the pram was very strong, so it didn't break. And so it's kind of advertisement for a pram actually, where they show that the pram is so strong that it doesn't break even if the subway goes on top of it. So the baby was safe. And if I now ask you how many people were there, how many people actually noticed how many people were there? No one, right? We didn't care. Even after knowing that I might again ask this question, or this question was a little relevant for the whole video, you still didn't care. So the whole problem is, do we even care for understanding each and every bit? And I think that's what is kind of a big question in front of us when we think of video understanding. So for this talk, I'm going to propose the task of visual prediction as a litmus test for video understanding. What I'm arguing here is that if we really understand the video, then we should be able to predict what's going to happen next. It's true even for images. For example, I'm showing this image and I ask you, so let's suppose the car on the left, bottom left, this car, the black car, is going to move. Can you tell how it's going to move? And I'm sure most of you will be able to say that this car is probably going to turn left because it's in the leftmost lane. It's still not going to go on the top of any people because we know cars are about people and so on. But not only you can predict the path of the car, you can even hallucinate if you want the pixels of this car, of how it's going to move. And so, if I really understand that this is a tree, this is a building, this is a zebra crossing, there are people crossing and cars don't cross over people, I should be able to predict it. And that's what I hope is the big challenge, that if we can actually do all this, understanding is definitely in the algorithm somehow. Just to show some of the results, what I would like to get at the end of the thing is, so given this static scene, this is what we are planning for, like what's going to happen next for this car. And we are going to first say, okay, these are the possible paths this car can take using an algorithm. The heat map shows what is the most likely area where the car is going to move. And then you can even hallucinate how this motion is going to look like. This is not exactly natural, but you can see it tries to avoid all these people here before it goes into the, before it turns on left. It tries to go it from between those two people. We are assuming that the rest of the scene remains static throughout the video, but of course the scene will be moving. Okay, so all during this talk, until now, whatever I've talked about, there's still an underlying question, which I have been avoiding, but is very relevant to the whole discussion. And I think that will turn out for me as a very important question, is if I know what's my task. I mean, if I'm trying to do video classification or video understanding, what is going to be the right primitive over which I'm going to reason about? And if you think in terms of primitives, all of us have used different kind of primitives, like in terms of scale, like the spatial scale. People have tried to classify each and every pixel of videos. In the video classification, I would think the whole video acts as a primitive because you do not care about what's inside those videos. On the whole, you are saying, okay, this is a swimming action and so on. There is also a question of what would these primitives represent. So, in the case of semantic classification, understanding the video in terms of semantic base, we believe that the primitives are these action primitives like bend, lift, and so on. And semantic objects also act as primitives. Now, what I believe, what we have found out is that for understanding videos, the three main properties are that the primitives should be representative. This one is obvious, that if it has to represent the video, it has to occur a lot of times in the data set. If there is something rare, you might not want to represent it in the big data set. It should be discriminative, and this primitive should look visually different from the rest of the world. And this property helps you to detect this primitive with high accuracy. So hopefully, if we are looking at the right things as a primitive, we should be able to detect them more than 30–40% of the time. And then we can do much better understanding of them. And finally, these primitives should tell you something about the underlying thing. So as soon as you detect it, you should know that something. I know I have now from zero information, I have some information about this whole thing. So for example, if I'm using on the right as a primitive, the action of lifting the thing, I should be able to say that probably this is a clean and jerk video because I see these kind of primitives occurring a lot in the clean and jerk action. So it should give you some information about the underlying phenomenon. So our goal is that given lots of input videos, which might be trained on, in this case we use the UCF, so they are trained videos, to find out what are the right set of primitives over which we should be reasoning about. And so in the case of clean and jerk, these are the three primitives that we found. Just to highlight that the semanticness of these do not matter because on the top we have half of the weight as a primitive, at the bottom we have the person as a primitive, and in the last primitive we have both the weight and a person combining to form a primitive. So part of an object, whole object, or two objects can form a primitive. It doesn't matter. The semanticness of these patches do not really matter. So how do we extract these primitives? The approach is kind of very simple. So for every training video, so if we have 50 training videos for an action like clean and jerk, we are first going to sample hundreds and thousands of these spatio-temporal endpoints. So for a video like this, for clean and jerk, I'm going to extract patches like these. So you can see that they are different scale, they are different height and width, they are different time lengths. So some might be 50 frames, some might be 100 frames, and so on. We sample across frames and across scales.
Is this completely blind or is it
Right now, so it's not completely blind. It tries to look for some gradients on the image side, but you can do some kind of sampling. I think the recent research on our mid-level patches have shown that if you use something like objectness, that might actually help you to do much better sampling and much faster. That's what you want. So once you've sampled lots of these patches, you first try to learn a distance metric on top of these patches. So for our work, we use the exemplar SVM as a distance metric. What this is very simple. We are going to take every patch as a positive, and we are going to sample lots of patches, similar patches from other classes of the video. For example, ball swing, clean and jerk. So if this is clean and jerk, we are going to sample for ball swing, bending, and so on. And we are going to take these patches as negative, and we'll try to learn SVM on top of it. And this is exemplar SVM can act as a distance metric for this patch on the left. And just to show you that this is a reasonable distance metric, here are some of the retrievals that you get for some of the top primitives. So you can see on the left there is the swing action for the discus throw, and on the right are the three retrievals, the top three retrievals. You can see there is a nice spatio-temporal alignment. Right when the person is about to swing, they actually align there, the patch starts. So
what feature space you using?
top 3D right now. On the bottom is this pull-up action. Again, it's focusing on torso and the legs, and there's a nice spatio-temporal alignment before it starts to, like the patches are very nicely spatio-temporally aligned. And that's what we want as a correspondence. I mean, we want to have a nice spatio-temporal alignment on these patches. Here are some more examples of other classes like diving, right before the diving starts, ball swing and the push-ups, the kind of patches these find. Okay, once we have these nearest neighbor retrievals, all we want to do is we want to select the top ones, like the best ones out of this. And for that, our criteria is you want the informative ones. So how do we find informative? You can just count that, okay, when I use this as a query, how many I retrieve from the same class. If I'm retrieving a lot from the same class, then that means this primitive is a very good representation for at least that class. I mean, if I'm seeing the presence of this primitive, it will tell me that, okay, this is definitely teenager or this is definitely Gaussian. And so here are the top primitives that you can get using for that approach for ball swing. The swing motion of the body, the legs will turn a little bit. Here are for the discus throw. Again, the swing motion of the body turns out to be very discriminative in the motion space. And just to make sure that this really makes sense, we did this for Gangnam dance as well, because we know how the Gangnam dance looks like really and what are the right primitives. Because when you try to do, these are the three main actions you do. So these are the top three primitives we find for Gangnam dance. And you can see that this action are exactly the things which Sai does for Gangnam dance. Now, of course, to just show that these primitives really make sense for existing approaches, we try the classification. Even though this is not our goal, we want to show that this will work for classification as well. So what we are going to do is we are going to detect these primitives in the video. We are going to spatially pool them, learn a spatial parameter on top of them, and then just use nonlinear SVM on top of it. So in 2013, when the paper was published, it was state of the art. I'm sure it has gone. I have not followed it up, but I'm sure the state of the art has gone. But both in UCF 50 and Olympics dataset, it was performing state of the art at that time. But again, I want to go beyond this. I just want to think in terms of classification as I started the talk. So the nice thing which I like about these patches is that the kind of spatial temporal alignment. So on the left, I'm showing the video. On the right, I'm showing the alignment of the spatial temporal patch on the video to show that these actually nicely align. Right when the body of the person here starts to turn, it superimposes the patch on the thing. So it shows you that the alignment is really nice. Again, on the left is a test video. On the right is the top patch, which is going to fire. And you can see right when the body is about to turn, the patch is superimposed and it basically fires.
So how do you find where the patch occurs in the testing?
So the full-blown sliding window.
It's sliding.
Yeah.
And using the ESDN.
Yeah, it is. And this one is my favorite example. So throughout the video, initially the person runs. This is the ward somersault kind of thing. There is no discriminative patch initially, which it finds was running happens across. But as soon as the hand touches the board, it basically thinks that this is something discriminative, and right there it basically finds a patch and it replaces it with the training patch. You can see it changes it, and it looks pretty good if you superimpose it. Now, because we have a nice spatial temporal alignment, you can think of that the second part of the talk where I said that we want to understand in terms of semantic concepts. This mid-level patches can even do that. So if you have a nice alignment and if you have the annotations in the training data, you can just transfer the annotations. And so for example, if I have objects detected in the training video, you transfer it with respect to the bounding box that is aligned, and you get a nice object localization. If you have fine-grained actions lift, like the person just now bent, then he lifted the weight, you can transfer them because you have alignment in this time as well. If you have poses of the people, you can transfer the poses. And if you have 3D pose, you can even transfer a 3D pose. So I'll show you some of the results of these transfers. You can see it even basically finds the golf club. It's actually not looking at the golf club, it's finding the golf club. But it's using the motion to know, okay, where would the golf club be at that point of time. The poses, of course, sometimes the poses might not exactly match because if you see the initial pose, the other person might have been doing something like the hand might be a little lower, but you can think of it as a good initialization for like pose estimation or something. And just to show you another example, which is a starting video which I was showing, that you can already transfer this. Okay, so now I'm a stage where I think I have a right primitive for doing understanding, but I'm still not talking about the task of understanding. That was a prediction, which is what I started the talk with. So the next question would be, can I use these mid-level primitives for doing prediction? So I think that you can do something. For example, you can try, so if this is a test video, you can try to match the training video to the test video. So for example, this one matches. Wherever it matches, you just copy the training video as a future for it. And this is what it's going to look like. So this looks like a good future prediction. I mean, So is it done? I mean, that's the question. If everything was working with the mid-level patches, is this prediction going to just work out of the box? So let me try another example. So in this case, I'm going to take this card. The patch detected another card here. So the car is turning like this. So the question is, if I just transfer the motion here, is this going to be the right future? Probably not, because in this case the car would basically go and hit the other car in the front. So for prediction, we just don't need the local alignment of the patches, but we also need to understand these alignments with respect to what else in the scene. We need to reason about the scene context before we can actually do prediction of the future in these cases. So as a next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see, okay, how can we model this scene context for prediction? I mean, how can we, once we have the alignment from mid-level patches, how can we look at the rest of the scene and try to reason out that this car cannot move in this direction, instead rather it should move more like towards this direction, and then try to get out of the parallel parking. So I'm going to talk about that. So, but I want to highlight that this is just a first step. So we are going to make a lot of assumptions while predicting. For example, we are going to make a prediction that none of the other scene actions are moving. So whatever I've seen right now is I just have to plan or do prediction on top of it. But in the real world, these cars, for example, that car will also be coming out. So I have to make sure that I don't hit that car and so on. So ideally, every patch will kind of do planning on itself. But now you have to make a game theory kind of thing where you have to plan keeping in mind the others, what others will be planning as well. But for the rest of the talk, I'm going to kind of ignore that. Okay, so the first step is again the same thing. Given lots of videos, we first want to find what are the mid-level patches, or what are the elements that are on which we want to plan. So we are going to do this extraction of the static patches. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk about the static mid-level patches because I want to predict from a single frame what's going to happen next. But you can think of it as these patches could very well have been the moving patches like these, and it would still work. The approach is kind of independent of whether you are predicting over these spatial-temporal points or you are predicting over the static patches. So once I have these primitives or the patches, the next step is I need to define the action space. Like what kind of future these patches individually can have. So for example, if I detect a primitive here, we allow 8 different kind of translation motions. So it can translate into one of these 8 directions. In this case, since the car is facing on the top left, the most likely translation is in the top left corner. So this is what it means in the hallucination world, that if the car moves top left, this is what it's going to look like. But not only we allow these translation on the image space, but we also allow transitions. That is, one patch can change into another patch type. So for example, this car can turn left suddenly. And in that case, this is that transition. So it changes from one mid-level patch to another mid-level patch. And that's how you can hallucinate. You can superimpose these hallucinations. How do we know which is most likely? For example, this was most likely motion, or which is the most likely transition. In the training videos, which are unlabeled completely, we first detect these mid-level patches in each and every frame. Then we track them, basically using KLP tracker, and we count how many times does a patch change into another patch, or how many times does the patch basically just moves or translates in what direction. And using these bin counts, you can basically see what is the most likely move that is likely to happen. So for example, for the top left patch, which is started in this direction, you can either turn a little right, that's the first thing, or you can continue, which is the arrow which is showing in this direction, this is the translation motion. For the second part, which is this motion, you can either turn a little bit on the left, or you can turn more towards left. So there are two possible turns, like this or like this. Or if you are just doing translation, because we have discrete translation directions, our thing assumes that it's going to move like this. And that is why you see these sliding cars, because we don't have verified translations around on the whole thing. And again, in this case, the car could turn, so this car could turn a little right, or it could just continue as a translation motion. Okay, so now that I have learned these transitions, if I use the transition model, the same problem, it's going to predict that it's going to go into the curve, but I need to look at the context. So how do I model that? So for each patch, we are going to model a reward function. That is, what areas are most like this patch most likely to move, or what area does it like to move in the image space? This is not an image space, this is not an 3D space or anything. So for example, for this patch, it likes to remain in these road regions. It hates to go into these zebra crossings or the buildings or the trees and so on. So the red means the most likely places where this patch could go in the future. How do we do that? Again, very simple. You detect these patches in the training videos, and you just see in the next frame where it moves. So you could learn that, okay, this is where it's going to move in the next frame. So you can learn the appearance in the previous frame, that these are the places where this patch can likely move. So now that,
So it's almost like you have a static camera assumption and you say, this is the region where before it moved in, and then this is what it looks like.
right, exactly. So we do not have static camera vision, we do basically all the homographies. So the cameras are moving in. So these are pop chase videos. We basically, at every few frames we do homographies, create a statistic, and then we learn it. Okay, now that we have both model the context using reward function and transitions on over patches, we can compute the expected reward to move from one location to the another. So for example, if I detect this will be a starting, if I detect a mid-level patch, this will be the original state. And I suppose I need to model how much reward will I get if I move to the top left corner. That will be just simply the probability of transition, how likely it is to move towards top left, into the reward. How much reward will you get if you move to the top left corner? And once you have this, once you can quantify each and every motion, which is the expected reward for each and every motion, you can just do simple planning for the future. So in an image, you first detect the mid-level patches, and these. You find out which are the most likely mid-level patches to move. So for example, this patch, even though it is detected, it has never moved in the training data. So you say, okay, these are not likely to move, so I can reject those patches. And then out of the remaining patches, you select the top one. So you say, okay, I'm going to plan over this one, the first one. So in this case, you're going to plan over the bottom left. Now this becomes the original state. We still don't know the goal state, like where is it, what it's trying to do. One possibility is to basically see, okay, where all. So what in this case, what we do is we take all the corners of the image as a goal state. So this could be a goal state, this could be a goal state, and so on. And we just plan over all possible goal states. So for example, if I'm taking this as a goal state, now I know that we want to reach here, given the starting point there. This is just the shortest path. You have between each node, you can create the expected reward. You can turn it into cost by doing the inverse, and then you just do the shortest path of the. And this is what the shortest path looks like. So the first time this path will just translate in this direction, then it just keeps translating because this patch allows the transition in this direction until it comes here. Now it has a lot of reward in this area. It can go. It cannot cross in this area because it sees people, and so it basically transitions here into another patch, and it just translates there into the patch. Right?
Is it because of the people or because of the right side of the wheel?
I think it's because of the people. I don't think that this patch actually understands that this is the right side of the wheel. This would require, I think, second order understanding of scene context. You want to, I don't think this is a very simplistic way of modeling the reward, right? It would require second order that I do see some other cars here, that is where this is right, and so on. So since I'm going to do this for all the poles, so this is another possible path, and so on. And now basically out of all these paths, I'm going to select the one which is the shortest, but you still have the distribution over all the, in terms of that was a heat map which was turning up of what are the likely features. So for the data set,
But if every patch is a potential target, then you just end up with a uniform distribution. You don't know what the goal is, right? Heat could be getting anywhere.
right?
So you average it
But your scene context will not allow all the poles equally likely. For example, there could have been lots of, there could have been traffic jam in this area. Now the scene context, so to go from here to there, we would require you to go through high cost regions, and then it becomes less likely. So the other way to assume that this one, suppose this as a goal patch, this location is a goal. Now it needs to go through this area, which is not allowed, which it doesn't like. So now that even the shortest path will have lots of cost into it, and that's why it will not like it. So as a data set, we collected 183 pop chases. This is easy to collect. People don't like to watch this video a lot. 139 we used as training. We didn't do any kind of hand labeling in this, not even, so everything was done in an unsupervised manner. We did 44 videos for testing. This roughly corresponds to 300 minutes of the data. So here is the first case. So this is the car we're going to plan over. This is the heat map. And you can see, it sees the bus there, so it tries to avoid the bus. Let me play one more. So it first thinks this is the most likely patch to move. You can think it wants to keep on the road, but it wants to avoid the bus. So that's why it turns the right to right, and then the car continues.
Is that a backwards car? It's actually flipped, right?
Yeah, so the mid-level patches are probably not very good enough to differentiate between the two. So I think it does flip at some point of time. It's hard to say actually whether it's right, because this is not one of those cars with lot big job. So here's another one. Again, we find the most likely patch to move. This is most likely path. It's like the top path. And this is the most likely motion. Anything else? So just to summarize, so there are two major questions which I wanted to look at as a future requirement. We know that classification has some problems. That is, first the question is what does it mean to understand? And what I propose here is prediction as a task. And I think that prediction is the right goal to go to. It can still go via semantics. I'm not arguing that it cannot go via semantics. For example, I might need to understand the persons, the cars, and then say I would want to reason the prediction over these semantic objects. For example, the cars cannot go on top of people and so on. But in this case, I try to look at mid-level patches as a way if we have to do the prediction of the future. But I think even semantics is a very right. I mean, if you can make it work somehow, semantics might not be wrong to do such reasoning. And our approach is basically just a small step in that direction. I have nowhere claiming that this is even close to solving. I think this is like just one first idea to look into this direction, and there's still a long way to go. For example, we made so many assumptions throughout the whole prediction framework. The second kind of question which I tried to look at was what are the right primitives for detection, and here we have proposed these mid-level patches of data-driven primitives as again a way to do prediction or understanding of the videos via these. And I think these have shown a lot of great promise, especially when you can detect them right, which is what one of the required properties of these primitives are. And I've shown that you can decline one of them.
Good questions before we...
So, yeah, in Tuesday we have a poster on static prediction of multiple flow with static images. And there we evaluate against the ground truth of the flow. How would you evaluate your method?
So, I mean, we looked at the path evaluation, but I think optical flow is actually much better to do. I mean, so for example, we could even predict optical flows from these things, right? I mean, the patches which are hallucinating. But we cannot predict the dense optical flow because we are not predicting every patch and so on. But I think, I mean, optical, so that's a good part about prediction, which I didn't go into the detail. But prediction can allow you to a right evaluation because you have seen the future at the next step, and this is not subjective at all. This is something which is happening in the future. There's a little. And prediction is not certain. For example, this car and the bus could be moving together, or one could be just standing. So there's not one answer. So out of 10 different answers, only one will be right. But our algorithm should be spitting out all the 10 before we can actually say what is right. So there are good and bad, but it does seem that prediction is definitely something which definitely requires. I mean, my contention is that for true understanding, this would be the right task to evaluate.
But the speed you don't have.
Right, the speed, yeah. So I mean, I think we can do the time of evaluation, something like that, so then it's independent of the speed. But that would be again, we evaluated on paths, but I don't think that's the right evaluation. I think evaluating, so patch is fine for these kind of scenarios where it's like a polarized view and so on. But if you want to do it on this kind of a motion, so you can think of mid-level patches can also having patches at like different scales. And now you can even do planning, like someone is going in depth, the scale just keeps getting smaller and smaller per person.
So have you applied this to like the Hollywood style video?
Yes, so that's the next thing you're trying to do. Right?
What are the kinds of things that you're anticipating are going to be the issue, like the static
So the biggest
stuff?
issue is the understanding of the indoor space. The reward function is no more simple. I mean, it requires a true 3D understanding, and I think working a lot on 3D understanding myself, I think this is definitely a very difficult problem. So there are two problems which I have faced until now, and I think both are right. So in the planning in the space of cars is easier because cars are easy to detect. Human pose really hard to detect. So even the initialization for those algorithms are really have given me a big problem. So I mean, we have tried that. We have been trying that for some time now, for 3 or 4 months now. And the second thing is this whole 3D understanding. It requires I need to model like how the person keeps getting smaller in scale as it goes more and more in depth. And so even though the framework in theory allows everything, in practice I think the problem of people detection is a little hard and 3D understanding is a little hard. So that is kind of a restriction, but we are working on that. We have some ideas hopefully with information.
And if you want more details on this,
The paper is on. So this is a CVPR paper. Just see.
thanks so much.